That and good morning if you're in the Central Time Zone, good afternoon if you're in the Eastern Time Zone, and welcome to the Central Chapter monthly webinar, where you have a great tech talk. I would say it's even way beyond a tech talk. Aubrey Swift has his mic open and will be giving a building envelope commissioning presentation that is at 68 slides. It is a full-on training presentation unto itself. So with that, knowing that we want to provide as much time for Aubrey as possible, I am going to get right to sort of the BCA business at hand. So a couple things just to share with you, and first and foremost, if you did not get to go to NCBC in Hartford, Connecticut, it turned out to be an absolutely fabulous event. I'm originally from the East Coast. I got to be honest with you, Hartford was not a destination location that I would have thought of, but neat little city, and what was really dynamite was the Science Center was right next door to the hotel, and we actually got to have a meal and a dinner in the Science Center, as well as kind of explore it as a private guest after hours. So it was a super dynamite event, and I highlight that to say the BCA folks, Liz Fisher, Sherry Adams and company, as well as the BCA board members, really try to put on a great event that's both fun as well as highly educational. So if you missed it, you can go online at some point. I don't think it's uploaded, and all the presentations, the proceedings are typically somewhere in there. I actually didn't look for it, so I can't point you to it, but I will make a note to see if I can find it. Usually if you follow the NCBC link, you can find the presentations. I will comment. People asked about it, and many years ago NCBC had a lot of process-oriented presentations. People are really drilling into the science, the technology, the nuances of commissioning in their specific presentations. So it's come a long way. I think it was a great conference. Saw some feedback to that regard. With that, I've got to put a plug to everybody on this call, and that is the Central Chapter did win NCBC for 2015. I do say win it because we had to put a submission package together. Your board members, Kevin Griesmer and David Lewis, did a dynamite job putting together a package that we presented last year. So that's how long it takes. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, guys. Kevin and David did a fabulous job, and we won to have NCBC in 2015 in the Central Chapter. It will take place in St. Louis. It's going to be at the downtown Marriott Park, I believe. So it's right by the ball field. Great location in St. Louis, so mark your calendars. Actually, I don't know the exact dates yet, but it will be about the same time as NCBC this year, next year in St. Louis. So I'll be following up with everyone on the call to talk about things like sponsorship, getting attendees to come. We really want to shoot the lights out of this. NCBC has been growing as the BCA has taken it over, so we're trying to revamp it. It had been shrinking for a couple of years as PECI kind of wound it down, and now the BCA is trying to ramp it back up. So I first and foremost put a plug in for that and say really looking for a dynamite representation of the Central region to make NCBC next year in St. Louis. A couple other things, if you haven't seen it, I usually talk about it, is the checklist. I'm on the BCA website right here on the home page. The checklist, the second quarter checklist is available. I haven't seen the third quarter one yet, but I would imagine that's in the near future. The other thing I would comment here on the BCA website, if you've not done that, you can go to News and Events. They are putting things up here. This is where the calendar is. I actually don't know why our Central Chapter call isn't here, so that's a to-do item on my plate, is make sure that all our monthly webinars are on this. But the Southeast Chapter is doing another event with 24/7. That is a data center sort of specific event and summit. It's a one-day event. That's actually, I think at this point, probably too late, but I point this out to you as you can look at things out into the future here on the events page. That was basically right here under news and events, and click more. So that's where we're trying to improve on getting people the information on what's going on. The other big thing I want to talk about are two more business items. One, we talked about it last time. I'm going to talk about it, and that was two months ago, because last month was NCBC when we would have had this, and that is the C-Note Club. Basically, I would venture to guess that everyone on this call that's on this webinar somehow, way, shape, or form gets their paycheck as a function of commissioning, and you are somehow associated with the BCA. Well, the BCA is taking on a huge endeavor, and you've heard me talk about this the last couple months, and that is the CWCC, or the Commercial Workforce Credentialing Council. I personally sat on that, and I will be sitting on it again in August. So a lot of volunteer hours are going into this. We had 4 members on the last committee. That was 3 days. So you got 4 people in 3 days of their time. That's a lot just from one organization. And what this is to turn commissioning into a certified, accredited profession, if you will, as viewed by the government. So training classes would be accredited. That is what we're working towards, and we're trying to make the BCA's CCP and ACP accredited. So the C-Note Club is literally a fundraising campaign. We're asking for members to donate $100. Again, I'll just kind of quickly show you. It's literally right on the home page at the bottom. It's called the C-Note Club, and it brings you right here, and you can contribute right there. The cost to the BCA is over $100,000 to get the CCP to be an accredited ANSI standard approved program and a certification. So it is big, big bucks, and that's not dollars that are just within your membership dues that the BCA can absorb. So I highlight that and say, please, all the chapters are digging deep, all the presidents are doing what I'm doing, and kind of asking on their hands and knees and begging, please. We're trying to raise funds for this. So both yourselves that are on the call as well as other members in your organization, it's not going to happen unless we raise enough funds to make it happen. So got to ask hard for that. With that, the group that was convened in the past, several of us will be reconvening in August, so I'll be spending 2 more days as well as several others to continue this. You may have seen a survey that went out. Liz Fisher sent the survey. So this is a multi-step process to determine what are the job task analyses, the JTAs, of what commissioning folks do. So that's what we're working towards, and this is all through the Department of Energy. And NIBS, the National Institute of Building Sciences, is basically running that. So that's what's going on from the BCA front. I would say this is sort of, as we get into summer, this is sort of the quiet time for the BCA. We've just wrapped up NCBC. We start getting into our planning mode. So if there's any folks that want to help with NCBC next year, we need people from the chapter to review presentations and make presentation selections. We're working on sponsorship and who's going to work on that. So we need bodies. So certainly you can reach out to any of the board members to kind of say, hey, I'd like to participate and help be an organizer for the Central Chapter for next year. I'll also put a plug in that come the fall, we'll be looking for board level nominations. So if you have an interest to getting more involved in just the Central Chapter operations, the fall is the time that those nominations come out. So with that, it took me about 12, 13 minutes here. I would like to basically do an introduction to today's speaker. Aubrey Swift is with DBHMS, located here in Chicago. And if I find my note here, Aubrey is trained as an architect and has been in practicing for about 35 years. Doing lead consulting. He's been doing commissioning for about the past 5 years, so super knowledgeable in this field. He brings 35 years of experience on the architecture side, so great kind of chemistry of lead experience, commissioning experience, and heavy architecture experience to jump into building envelope commissioning. He put together a dynamite presentation that I'm going to pull up right now, and with that, turn it over to Aubrey.
Okay, thanks, John. And I'm using the speakerphone, so John, let me know if this thing starts clipping my sentences, and if it does, I'll pick up.
All right, Aubrey, I'm not hearing you. I heard you for a second. You can kind of cut in and cut out.
Okay, how does it sound now? Because I was on speakerphone, and sometimes that clips. Can you hear me? Not hearing me, right?
Still not. Right.
Okay, I am talking.
I hear you. Let's see.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, hear you loud and clear now.
Okay. So I was on the speakerphone. I don't know if that was the problem or something at your end there.
Okay, I'm hearing you fine. If anyone's not hearing Aubrey, and I guess throughout the presentation, Aubrey's going to be telling me to flip slides here, and actually I'm going to go to slide view from the beginning in just a second. But if you have a question, throw that up in the chat window, and I will be monitoring that as Aubrey goes through the presentation.
Okay, great, John. And if you go to slide presentation view, I'm sorry I didn't get to NCBC. That sounds like a great event. I was there last time we were in Chicago with that. It's great to hear that it's going to be a little closer this next year. Interesting comment that John made about the job task analysis. And it was interesting to me, particularly in light of this presentation, to hear that NIBS was involved or is involved in that committee to create a professional accreditation for CCP, because what we're talking about today is a part of commissioning that's not in the mainstream yet. And if you go to the next slide, John, we'll talk a little bit about how commissioning is being defined for enclosures.
Hey, Aubrey, I don't know if that's me or you
coming up.
That cut out again. If someone could throw
it's got to be at your end, because I'm just using a plain old phone.
Okay.
And I'm hearing it pretty well through my ears. Do you want me to try recalling in?
No, I guess if anyone else is having problems hearing Aubrey, let me know. Throw that in the chat window, just so I know if it's on my end or if it's on Aubrey's end. If you guys are all hearing them fine, then I won't worry about it.
Maybe you're on speakerphone and it's cutting out for that reason. Why don't you go to the next slide, John? What we're going to have to do, you're going to have to hear me because
Yep. No, we're good.
I'm going to have to go through 69 slides, and each time I'll get weary of saying next slide. I'll probably just say next. But anyway, I don't know if you guys have received RFPs like this, but we have, and you see here that building envelope commissioning is kind of thrown in at the bottom of this slide. Hold on a second. I gotta close my window. Okay, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, building envelope commissioning, what is it? Here we have a client who just said, we're going to commission everything. We're going to commission the water systems, the breathing air, the shop's air, etc., HVAC systems, plumbing systems, and then just as a kind of an almost afterthought, including building envelope commissioning, and they didn't spell it right. Next slide. So you see there is a market out there, there is a sense out there, there's a stirring that the building envelopes are becoming part of commissioning. Next slide, John. And that, that there's something that can be commissioned, but people don't really know what it is yet. My answer is it's a systematic process for achieving, verifying, and documenting that the building enclosure components meet the owner's defined requirements, in other words, the owner's project requirements we're all familiar with, as they relate to energy, water, indoor environmental quality, and durability. The key things here are what are building enclosure components and what does the owner decide to define. Next slide. The LEED has defined it as they have now included building enclosure commissioning in LEED version 4 as 2 credits under energy and 2 points under the energy and atmosphere enhanced commissioning credit. So where you'll see some owners asking for enhanced commissioning, they can also get 2 points there on that credit for getting enclosure commissioning included. And LEED limits it to energy, water, indoor environmental quality, and durability. Next slide. The reason that that is a substantial limitation is because the National Institute for Building Science, which has written the defining document for envelope commissioning, has left it wide open that envelope commissioning could include anything that the owner chooses to put in the OPR. So there are many areas, you see some listed there, that could be part of envelope commissioning that aren't part of envelope commissioning for LEED. Next slide. So hold on a second. Did you skip a slide maybe? Go back one. Okay, so, no, okay, go ahead.
Was this one?
Yeah, we're good.
And then there's the next one.
So what the point I was trying to make there is that building envelope commissioning is not well defined. Depending on what the owner decides to put in terms of parameters for the building envelope, those could all be in there. But for LEED, it's defined for those four elements. So what we're looking at is the functionality. Does the building envelope do what it's supposed to do? Does the roof keep the water out? Does the walls keep the warmth in? The durability, the constructability, you'll see more about that. The design and installation quality, and the maintainability. Next slide. And what we want to do, obviously, like in any commissioning, is optimize the systems that are involved. And a little more fundamentally with the envelope, which you don't have as much risk with the HVAC systems, although you could in a critical facility. But next slide. We know that the envelope keeps water out, which is a key item, and we'll see a little bit more about that later. So what are the tasks involved in commissioning an envelope? And I want to take you right in kind of close on this because you don't need to hear the generalities. Next slide. So we're going to inspect the work after we've gone through the typical procedure, which is, we're all familiar with the OPR, is again the mother document that defines what the owner wants. Now, I won't pretend that owners are very sophisticated at writing OPRs for envelopes yet. They might just say, I want a building that doesn't leak. But the design review, the second item in that list, is really a very, very key point, and you'll see that as I go through this, because there is quite a difference between building envelope commissioning and mechanical systems commissioning in terms of where the emphasis falls in the building delivery program. The rest of these are similar. Inspect construction becomes a little more key because as things go in, other things get covered up, and testing becomes a little less important than mechanical. Next slide. Here we see the summary of the points I've just been trying to make. After you have installed the roof, the walls, the windows, these become very difficult things to correct, as you can imagine. If there's something wrong, if you have a window that's not waterproof, the retrofitting is going to be expensive. So we move the emphasis to the early part of the process where we're looking at the drawings a lot and in very great detail, as you're going to see. Also, I like to say building envelopes don't have moving parts. That kind of makes me happy because I'm an architect by training, and you guys deal with a lot more moving parts. Next slide. Actually, though, building envelopes do move, and that's where some of the key problems come in. This slide just is telling you that LEED does a very poor job of defining building envelope commissioning. All they've done is reiterate the points that they require for enhanced commissioning, which are the same for mechanical and envelope. Next slide. So I'm not going to do a big preach here on green buildings. We're all on board with that, I hope. Air leakage. I'm trying to get exact statistics on this. There was a statistic out there that DOE said that air leakage was responsible for 40% of the energy use in buildings. My people tell me that's way too high, but it is a significant number. And I do know that 80% of the lawsuits that come down during building delivery process are a result of water intrusion. So that enough is a good sponsorship or a good reason to be looking at this. Next slide. So what I want to do is give you an example from a true life story here. This is a project in Grand Rapids that we did building envelope commissioning on. It's a corporate headquarters for a large food distributor. Next slide. And the basic systems, you might be thinking to yourself, what are the building enclosure elements? Well, it's common sense. They're the roof, they're the walls, they're the components of each of these systems. So there's walls are typically made up of many layers. In this case, there was a very conventional precast wall system, and there was what's called a rain screen system, which is a very trendy kind of system where the actual waterproofing membrane is behind the aesthetic layer that you're actually seeing. So there's a set of panels that actually let air and water through, and then the real waterproofing is called, in this case, was a proprietary product called Blue Skin. Next slide, which is a peel and stick elastomeric membrane. So when we're thinking about commissioning the envelope, we're mostly thinking about the interfaces between different systems. That's because each manufacturer is pretty good at making sure that his or her system works properly, but when the two systems come together, they're installed by different tradesmen, often at different times, often under different weather conditions, and it's at those junctions where you start running into problems. Next slide. So we do, you're going to see emphasize the document review, but we also do a certain amount of visual inspections and a certain amount of performance testing. And this is a list of the scope that was used on this project. Next slide. So again, owner's project requirements were very general. You know, they wanted a building that didn't leak. They wanted to make sure the insulation that they were paying for was performing, and that the energy model would reflect the actual performance of the building. And I might say that this building's been running a year, and the energy use has been under the projected use. Next slide.
And Aubrey, I'll throw a question out to you, and I think maybe this is something you can answer and give a little guidance on, and that is, as you mentioned, a lot of this building envelope is sort of now coming into the industry where mechanical, electrical, plumbing has been out there for a while. And we do see that RFP that just says, commission the electrical, the mechanical, the heating, the plumbing, the building envelope, the fire protection. It just kind of lists building envelope as like a piece of equipment. When it comes to that OPR and you're trying to figure out, okay, what is the scope? What does the owner want? I mean, any tips or when you talk to the owner, I mean, okay, great, you want a building that doesn't leak, but like, is that actually achievable, or to what degree? I mean, as you go through that, I know when we talk about like OPR and I think about mechanical systems, we talk about, okay, well, we want things accessible. Well, okay, let's put some framework to what does accessible mean? Is that John Bellani accessible? Is that, Joe who's down in the maintenance shop accessible? What does that mean? And maybe this is a follow-up, but, I could see where we get poor OPRs and MEP systems have been going around for a while. I mean, I can't even imagine that you get much in the way of an OPR for the envelope.
That's right, John. We don't, but there are certain things that are implicit when an owner goes to an architect or a team to deliver a building. One of the things I just thought of as you were talking is if the building won't hold temperature or people are uncomfortable, you know about that in the first year. A lot of the elements that have to do with the enclosure, you may not know about them for 10 years, 15 years, depending on the warranties and the materials. So there is a lot of stuff that may get passed for the first 5 years until the sealants start to harden. If I were an owner, as much knowledge as I have, I would say I would insist that all the flashing around the roof be such that I can remove the roof without removing any other major systems. Now, I've seen a lot of buildings where that's not true. So when it comes time to take the roof off, say in 10, 15 years, they're going to have a costly process because they're going to have to disassemble metal panels to get behind them, or they're going to have to do some kind of a farmer's fix when they get to that point.
Gotcha.
So maintainability is one thing that I would counsel owners to take a good look at, and it's hard because people don't have that long a time vision.
Right.
When they're, let me just get this thing built and I get to my next promotion and on to the next job and I'm fine. So the other thing is I did work on a building where they said we want no thermal bridges. That is, we don't want any elements in the exterior wall or roof system that penetrate the insulation in such a way that they can transmit heat from the interior to the exterior. That was a pretty welcome and happy and aggressive thing to have put in the owner's project requirements, and it gave me some leverage in reviewing the documents.
Isn't that why you architects came up with the term thermally enhanced? Isn't that better?
Well, I don't know who came up with that, but in a typical window mullion, for example, you have a thermally enhanced or a thermally broken system where the aluminum in the interior doesn't touch the aluminum on the exterior.
I know there's some slides of this later, so if you want to save that, we can even talk about that, because I did have the luxury to take a look at this morning, so I'll let you field that one later. That was sort of a teaser one.
Right. Suffice it to say, we do not get good OPRs that really define all this stuff.
All right. But I like your comment, though. I mean, one thing that just hit me as you responded was the longevity. I mean, as simple as, hey, all the components should be at least 10-year life cycle or longer, if whatever the owner wants, but not that you have a 5-year product mixed with a 10-year product with a 50-year product and saying, oh, yeah, we've got a 50-year envelope. So, I mean, that comes to mind, too. So, okay.
Actually, to that point, one of the things the owner should do is identify what is the life expectancy of the building. For a retail strip mall, that could be as short as 15 years. For a university campus building, they could be looking 200 years. So there are differences there. So the real meat of what I do is in the design review, because if the architect hasn't caught all the issues in these pages and pages of details, and here you see these are wall sections at large scale. Next slide. Defining how these elements come together, then it's unlikely they'll get bid properly, and if they're not bid properly, it's unlikely they'll get built properly. This is an example from Gordon Foods where at the top of this slide you see that there is a one system of wall, and below at the bottom there's a precast, that thing with the little dots in it. We'll get more familiar with this. Is precast. Above that is the rain screen, and these two systems have to come together, in this case at a horizontal joint. Next slide. Oh, and sorry, my comment there and also my comment here in the issue log is what I did is I looked at that whole area of rain screen on the elevation of the building, and I see that the architect has detailed the bottom condition of the rain screen, but they haven't detailed the side condition. So the first issue in design review, or one of them, is agreement needed on how blueskin will be sealed to the precast. See markups. So typically in design reviews we have written comments like this that can be responded to in typed responses, and then we also have drawings, as you'll see. Next slide. So I'm going to take you through one drawing to give you the sense of how this works. This is not a simple condition, and it won't be clear to you immediately, but there is a face of wall on the right, and then there's a horizontal soffit, and at sort of middle down you can see that's actually a mullion for an entrance system. So this is an overhanging soffit at an entrance, and then there off to the right there is a glass canopy roof that provides rain cover for people entering this building. Next slide. And what goes on with this is that, next slide, John, is that we see a lot of systems coming together here, and John, if you'll have your finger on the button, I'm going to walk you through this fairly fast. So this is the detail as it shows up on the architectural drawing. Next slide. And the
Nope. There we go.
Next slide.
Yeah, there we go. Oh, sorry.
Okay. All right. So the pink there, that's the structural system of the building. It's a precast concrete. And then in the next slide, it will light up, and you see the metal panel. Sorry, not metal panel. Light gauge metal framing that is shot into the structure to hold this particular wall assembly and soffit. Next slide. And then that brown is something called the sheathing, which is in this case a drywall with fiberglass impregnation in it. It's called dense glass, so it's basically just like a wallboard, except it's a little more waterproof. So they screw that to the steel framing, and then in this next slide you see that there's a dotted blue line. That's the blueskin, which is the actual waterproofing that keeps the water out of the building. And the purple, those two purple elements are the aluminum and glass curtain wall system that's provided by a curtain wall manufacturer or a window wall manufacturer or a window manufacturer. Next slide. Okay, and then this last element here is that's the metal panels, which are actually the aesthetic interface of the building, but they don't keep the water out. The water penetrates past those metal panels. So just note that blue thing, that blue dotted line in there, which I, highlighted for you, but imagine yourself reading this drawing. Next slide. You're going to find that, oh, I forgot an element. The green is the sprayed closed cell insulation that the architect was using. So that comes in last, and God help us if the 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 installer has a long enough wand to get it sprayed in there. That's a whole other issue. Next slide. So the reason we have to look very, very closely at these details, here you see the guys installing panels over the blue skin. But the most critical element in that last drawing was that dotted blue line, and that's probably one of the hardest things on the drawing to read.
And Aubrey, just to interrupt a second, I think in this one, yeah, I see the Dens glass in the photo, and then isn't this where they're applying the blue skin? Is that what they're doing there?
Yeah, they're actually, the blue skin is in place, and they're applying glass panels over the blue skin at this particular part of the building.
I got you. Okay.
Next slide. So let's drill down even a little further. This is a blow-up of that detail, and you could see the dotted line that represents the blue skin, and then all these materials are called out here. Next slide. Oh, thank you. And if you go,
oh, there we go.
So there again is the Dens glass gold. That's the sheathing. The next slide will show you this element, the pre-finished counter flashing. The architect, rightfully so, says, I want the water that's behind the panels in this rain screen to be diverted out of the wall and onto the top of this glass roof. And that's what this particular element does. Next slide. Now, the only problem with that is that this glass curtain wall canopy does not get ordered until the Dens glass is in place, and it takes 6 or 8 weeks to build that. Next slide. So when you say that you want to lap the pre-finished counter flashing over the metal or the glass and aluminum canopy, you're asking something to happen on an element that's not there yet. So this is an example of a sequence problem in building a building. You're going to have the guy that does the blue skin come back after the glass and aluminum is put up, but before the metal panels are put up, and put in this particular pre-finished counter flashing that you see circled there in pink. So these are the kind of things we point out during design review, and the contractors have to be aware of it. It requires out-of-sequence work, which often adds to additional expense and change orders. Next slide. Also, here's an element that doesn't even show up in the architectural detail, but is pretty key to this whole assembly. And that is that there have to be something to hold these metal panels on, and those are a metal clip system which gets drilled through the blue skin, waterproofing, through the Dens glass into the steel stud backup system. So here we have thousands of holes drilled in a waterproofing membrane. Not always the best. Next slide.
And are you going to explain, like, how I mean, obviously...
We'll get back to that.
Well, you got me curious.
Okay, so now to see what this looks like in real life, there's the Dens glass installed. Next slide. And then you see this guy comes along with a paint roller and applies an adhesive over it, and then he peels and sticks this blue skin, and he's doing it right. The blue skin laps over that white material that he's standing on, and that is the PVC roof membrane. So you have a shingle effect. Any water that gets on the blue skin will be diverted over top of the roof, which is where you want it, not in the building. And next slide. We will see, though, this is not a great slide, but this is a close-up of, on the right you see the blue skin, and on the left you see precast concrete, and there's about a ½ inch to an inch gap between the two, and that raises another question. So we've been through the design review. We raised a question about this condition. The architect never detailed it, as it turned out, and I'm sure I wouldn't be the first commissioning agent to have an issue ignored. at that point in the project. Next slide.
At least I've had the same problem, I'm sure.
Yeah. So the field report points out that the Blueskin VP has been caulked to the precast panel. Between the last picture and this one, a guy came through with a big tube and went, that's, you know, he smushed in a bunch of polyurethane stuff to try to glue that blueskin to the precast. And my job as reviewer is to say, well, that's fine. That may last as long as the caulk lasts, which could be 5 to 10 years. But meanwhile, it's covered up by the metal panels, so how are you going to repair that caulk without a lot of expense? Plus, I got you on this, that can you show me that that termination that you used is in accordance with the Blueskin manufacturer's written recommendations? Because if it's not, you're not in compliance with the documents. Next slide.
I'm going to ask a question because I see a little reveal here and I see a little reveal here. So again, now you've got the blueskin, which is obviously straight, and now you've got a little bit of a hole where that looks like there's a ridge or a lip or a reveal. So I would imagine just that big tube of caulk is all smushed in there.
Exactly. And one of the things that we struggle with is in the envelope commissioning business, caulk or sealant is the sort of great, I haven't said this before, so I'm not thinking there's a good phrase here. It's the great equalizer. It's the great, compromiser. It's the sort of ultimate solution that the contractor says, well, if I don't have things coming together in the right way, it's no problem because I will caulk it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you guys have taken caulk out of your houses, you know that it gets hard, it fails. Let's go on and we'll see more about this. So I raised this as an issue and I said, please submit a detail that shows how you intend to terminate the blueskin at the precast panel. So at the bottom here you see precast, and then you see the blueskin turning a corner coming down, and then you see the big smush of sealant there. Now, if you know anything about the science of sealants, you know that they have elongation characteristics in certain directions, but not in other directions, and their elongation is not infinite. So this detail actually wouldn't work according to most sealant manufacturers. Next slide. And furthermore, the blueskin manufacturer says in their written recommendations that the blueskin must be lapped over any adjacent materials by at least 3 inches and at glue adhered. So this is what should have been done, or what actually can be done in a remedial situation where the blueskin is already cut. We take another piece of blueskin flashing, we bend it over, we glue it to the precast, and we cover it all up with a piece of metal trim, which is ultimately what they did. But it was never shown in the architectural details, so they didn't have it in their price, and they grumbled. Next slide. So that's all I'm going to say about that particular termination. You were asking earlier about the clips. On the left, you see we had the contractor prepare a sample board of blueskin glued to Den's glass. Then we had him screw the clip through, and we put a water test on it, and it turned out that the blueskin did self-heal, and no water came through the holes. There are a number of these materials, including modified bitumen made by W.R. Grace, that are so-called self-healing. And so that's how we can have thousands of fastener holes going through them. But they don't take a kind of static pressure of water that could force water through. The water coming down has no pressure, has no back pressure, and so it just basically beads up and rolls off. Next slide.
And I guess I'll just throw a precursor to something later. As you talk about building pressure, and obviously the blueskin, I would imagine, is part of the envelope that's going to help with keeping air pressure in your building or the building pressurized and the outside out and the inside in. Do those holes present any issue? Obviously, like you said, thousands of these clips. Does that present any issue with in terms of pressurizing your building? Later on, you're going to talk about a building pressure test.
Not that I know of. We've pressure tested buildings with rain screen systems, and there's no noticeable, no noticeable heat transfer or air transfer revealed by infrared on those buildings. So the pressure of the screw going through, it's a self-tapping screw. It pretty much fills the hole that it makes. I haven't seen any evidence that would be at a micro level where somebody might, they might want to delve into that. I haven't.
Gotcha. Okay.
So this made it into the final report. Next slide. And the owner knows about the condition. They know where the sealant is. There's a recorded document that shows how the situation was solved, and a maintenance person in the future who starts to get leakage could then go and look and say, all right, maybe it's this caulk that is failing, and I'll know exactly where to look for it. So in that sense, this commissioning is, we do actually do a systems manual that's similar to one that would be in any commissioning process, and warranties and details are in there, and there is a little bit of a history created. This is another condition where, I'm just going to go through this quickly, where the rain screen terminates at a roof condition. You see a parapet there, a little mini parapet. And if we go to the next slide, there's a photograph of our field people looking at this. It turned out that, again, the blue screen installer was pretty casual, and he just cut the blue screen at the edge of the DENS glass, so now we've got a gap here. Next slide.
Yeah, I think what he's talking about is the blue screen is right, kind of cut right there. Is that correct, Audrey, where my arrow's going?
Yeah, the blue skin is cut, and then the roofing membrane comes up, so now the roofer has to come back, and I think it gets clearer in one of the later slides.
Okay.
Let's
see if I can. There we go.
That's actually my finger. Thank you very much. Is on the edge of the DENS glass, and you can see the blue skin just kind of barely makes the edge. So what has to happen here is, this is talking about out of sequence again. The metal panel installer has to come back, remove the top layer of metal panels so that the roofer can take his PVC membrane over top of this wall and down the face of the blue skin and glue it to the blue skin, which incidentally, part of the review is to make sure that everybody is aware that these two materials are compatible with each other and can be glued to each other. There are some materials and glues that don't play nice. Next slide.
And as we talk about those caulks and glues and adhesives, I guess one thing that comes to my mind is the same thing, is that what is the lifespan of those products? And I guess going back to that kind of OPR question, like, should it be at least 10-year, life, etc.?
Yeah, very good point. And also, you may know that the manufacturers of these products are not very forthcoming with their chemistry for obvious reasons, trade secrets, etc. And so there is no, it's not easy information to get. Let's skip through this. Next slide. We had other issues. We did do an infrared scan of this building, and it performed very well. In general, we did a scan of the roof, which showed no major issues. Here you see, rather exaggerated, the colors are. There's only about a 18-degree difference between the face of the precast and the face of the aluminum, but the aluminum is in red there, and that's obviously where the most heat exits the building. glass is next, and the spandrel panels, which are in green, are next. This little green dot up in the upper right-hand corner represents the spot on the precast where the embed for the steel is that holds the precast onto the building. And that embed has to penetrate through the spray foam insulation. And so that is a good example of a thermal bridge, and you see how it's represented here in maybe about 15 degrees Fahrenheit warmer surface than the rest of the precast. Next slide. So I'm going to just touch on another project very quickly. This was a similar in that it was precast and it was an air and water barrier with a rain screen system. Next slide. And one of the things I mentioned, sealants. In precast systems, sealants are used for all the joints between the precast panels. So you have a precast material which is probably a 100 or 200 year material, and then you have a sealant which is a 10-year material. Those sealants go through adhesion tests. That's one of the kinds of tests we do, and make sure they're installed correctly and will last at least as long as the manufacturer says they'll last. Next. Here we had a different sheathing, but it's basically a competitor of Den's glass. You see on the right a gentleman installing the water barrier, in this case fluid applied. Next slide. And here's where testing came in. The tester found that the barrier was averaging around 40 mils. It was supposed to be 60 mils, so back out they came and reassembled their lifts and went back to work. That's where testing during the application period plays a key role, making sure these things are right before they get covered up. Next slide.
And Aubrey, are you doing the testing? I mean, you talk about testing, and I see things like lifts, and there's equipment for these adhesion tests. You know, in the commissioning world, I mean, I know on the MEP side, a lot of times, you know, we've got thermometers and pressure gauges, and it's, you know, pretty easy to have, you know, a tool bag full of tools and be able to do most of what we need to do for the MEP side of commissioning. But, you know, here I see lots of other stuff, you know, etc. So is the testing done by the building envelope folks, or is that someone else?
Well, it's generally someone else. Just as in the mechanical side, test and balance is usually done by a different firm. But your comment points up a very important point, that in trying to determine the scope of building envelope commissioning, it's very key to have identified what tests are going to be done and by whom. We can do certain tests. We could probably do a mill. We can subcontract to do a blower door test. We can do infrared scans. We could probably do this test if we had the tool, but it varies from project to project, to answer your question.
Okay.
But the number of tests is something that should be in the architectural specifications, and that becomes a very important thing to review in order to understand the scope.
And I guess I'll play devil's advocate, since I don't think I've ever seen an architectural spec that said do these tests. So I'm guessing that's sort of more of the building envelope commissioning design review, is to say, hey, we'd like you to include this test, and this test based on what we're seeing your design is. Is that probably a fairly accurate statement?
Yes, that's accurate. In fact, we will write specifications and forward them to the owner and recommend that they do XYZ test.
Gotcha.
And go to the next slide. We have done whole building. You know, we'll recommend a whole building, a blower door test or an infrared scan. Just to finish this picture, on top of the waterproofing, aluminum hatch channels go, and then on top of that, the cement panels to complete this rain screen system.
So I can only imagine that it's really critical that you get these tests coordinated, because, boy, if I'm the contractor and you come and say, hey, you failed your 40 mils to your 60 mils, but yet somebody else has installed all these hat channels, I'd be awfully ticked off if I got to take all those hat channels back down. So timing of those inspections and tests is really critical.
It is, and needs to be put in the master schedule, just as commissioning and startup of rooftop equipment or whatever, air handlers need to be in the master schedule so that people can see that there's time included for that for those to take place and to get the results back in some cases.
Yeah, and I think that's a sort of good example. I mean, it usually doesn't matter if you start the rooftop up on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, or you do your commissioning on Wednesday or Thursday. But boy, I could see where these guys are ready to run. They got their lifts, they got their scaffolding system, and probably the second that roller finishes dry, and they want to get this next phase installed. So I could imagine that the timing of these is probably super critical.
Very true. Very true. So let's go on to talk about a test that has to, by its nature, occur at the end when the building is fully finished and enclosed. Next slide.
I love your comment about the $8 toaster, by the way.
Yeah, that's one that's an analogy that we use for control systems and air handlers and all the rest. It's something that people don't realize about buildings and commissioning in general, and it's something that we all should be reminding them of. That every building is a prototype. It's never been built before. It's never been tested. And if you don't test it, how do you know it works? So, next slide. There's a little history here. This is the computer set up at Ping Tong Park. We had little tubes running all over the place, tubes running outside for the outdoor pressure, tubes running to various parts of the building for the indoor pressure, and then those fans you saw, their speed is controlled by the computer. Next slide. There's been quite a bit of advance in this area in the last 10 years, and whole building pressure testing now has become much more accessible. This is the kind of rigs they used to have. Next slide. And because of the advances in the computer controls for the pressure blowers, we can now have much lighter stuff we can carry from a car and install. Next slide. And really do a more precise test. So here you see a rig for a whole building pressure test. Those fans have different inserts so that you can change, there are rings that go in that change the amount of air the fan will move, and then the RPM of the fan is measured by the computer, which has the fan curve in there, so we know exactly how much air is going into the building. We know what the differential pressure between the inside and the outside is, so we can get a reading. Next slide. And the amount of air that leaks through the building enclosure tells us something about the infiltration rates that the HVAC system should be designed for. And it tells us something about how successful we were in commissioning the enclosure and getting it built. Because if we combine this with an infrared scan, we can see, provided there's a sufficient pressure or temperature differential, we can see where warm air is leaking into the building. And it's usually at a junction between two systems. Now, let me get up on a soapbox for a second. This is an area that LEED has completely neglected. And not to fault them, because there hasn't really been a standard out there for how leaky a building can be to be acceptable. We now have the first inklings of a standard, and the IECC 2012 establishes in their prescriptive path 0.4 cubic feet per minute per square foot of building shell when tested at 75 pascals, which is about 0.3 inches water column, which is a higher pressure than you will get in normal operation. Next slide.
Yeah, that seems pretty high from the pressure point that when you want to keep a pressurized building, you're dealing with 0.03 or something in that realm.
Right. My screen just went blank. Is that okay?
I went to the next slide. Milton Friedman window testing.
Okay. No, I got it. So building pressure testing, that's a whole nother slideshow, really. But there's starting to be some agreement around this 0.4 CFM per square foot of building enclosure as a somewhat of a, let's call it a bar. It's not particularly hard to attain in a new building. Ping-Tong attained it, probably did double that, 0.2 CFM per square foot of air leakage.
And when you say square foot, is that, I would imagine for the envelope, you've got the four sides of the building. What about the roof? What about the slab? What is that, 4 sides, 5 sides, 6 sides? What is that square footage, just out of curiosity?
It's 5 sides. So when we do energy modeling, we're typically talking about the enclosure elements as elements that are separating spaces that are significantly different in terms of their environment. So if it's 70 degrees inside and 50% relative humidity and it's 20 degrees outside, then the element that separates those two is a building enclosure element. So in a cubicle building, it's 4 walls and the roof. The slab on grade is generally disregarded because the delta T is only about 15 degrees and the ground warms up eventually, and there's not significant heat loss that way. But the perimeter of the slab on grade is very important and is part of the enclosure element because air can leak between the precast panels and the footing, or even air can even leak through the dirt to a certain extent. So the 0.4 CFM per square foot is per square foot of building enclosure element, which typically is 4 walls and a roof.
Gotcha. Thanks.
This is just an illustration of a kind of a peripheral issue on envelope commissioning, but this is a project where we were the engineer of record for the HVAC system, but we also participated in this program to try to determine what to do with a set of existing windows in a Gothic structure. Next slide. So a testing agency, Architectural Testing Incorporated, came out and set up back boxes on 4 different window types and tested the actual infiltration, air infiltration through those windows. And you can see about the 3rd one down, the existing windows, 2.4 CFM per square foot. They're darn leaky. That's very leaky. The new windows are way down under 1.1 CFM per square foot. I think the ultimate solution that was decided on was, it varied from facade to facade, but it was somewhere in the middle with storms installed behind the existing windows. Go next slide. The nice thing about this was that we were able to use this information to properly and more accurately and more precisely size the mechanical equipment. You can see the bar graph on the far left. That would be the heating and cooling loads in MBH, and KMBH, sorry, for the whole building with the existing windows. And then these other graphs are the building loads for heating and cooling with the different retrofit alternatives that were considered for windows. So here's the envelope commissioning and the testing feeding back to making the HVAC system, which, by the way, was very difficult to fit into this historic building, no bigger than it absolutely had to be. Next slide. That's really the points I wanted to make. The process the design review, I tried to get across the idea that you really have to drill down in the details. The submittal reviews are key. What products are they actually going to buy and bring in? Because oftentimes specs will include kind of generic categories. The inspections are key because if you don't catch it then, it's going to be very expensive to fix. The tests are important. Where they come, and the blower door test being the last one, the sort of grand finale, comes at a time when it's pretty impossible to correct very much. Well, that's not true, but it's impossible to make major changes. The building's built at that point. And then we document the training, the systems manual, the as-builts, all of that, just like in normal commissioning. Next slide. And again, functionality, durability, constructability, design, installation, quality, maintainability.
I liked your comment about sequence. That was one of the things you commented on that comes to mind. That's a little bit different. We don't necessarily worry quite so much about that on some of the MEP systems. I mean, the plumbing system goes in the way it does, the electrical, the mechanical. I mean, yeah, I mean, sometimes ductwork has to be installed first or plumbing first or something. But your sequences, boy, that was a kind of a tricky thing. You talked about that flashing and the lapping of the blue skin. So interesting. That kind of comes to mind as you look at these.
Yeah, and in mechanicals, unless they're using it for temp heat or something, you don't really worry so much how they get there as long as it's all in the right place when it's done. There are some sequence issues. Next slide. A little motto to go away with, which we all need to remember. And I'll open it up. If anyone's still awake, we can have some questions.
Well, there's one here that came in that says, couldn't light and sound transmittance fit into lead, IAQ, etc.? I think this came in earlier when we were talking about sort of the OPR. So I would say I think both of those would fit in.
Both of those could very well be included in the OPR, and if they were, they could fall under envelope commissioning. It depends on what priority the owner puts on them. LEED typically doesn't address light transmittance in the enclosure commissioning credit. By the way, LEED version 3 allows enclosure commissioning as an innovation credit. LEED version 4 now has formally included envelope enclosure commissioning, rather. By the way, also, I should have said this at the beginning, but envelope commissioning, enclosure commissioning, shell commissioning, they're all terminologies that are out there, shell testing, that have not yet quite sorted themselves out as to which one is going to prevail, but I prefer enclosure commissioning or envelope commissioning. LEED deals with light transmittance more in the natural light credit. Sound transmittance is not part of the LEED formula, but it certainly could be a key enclosure commissioning issue if you're building an office building next to an interstate, for example.
Yeah, think about O'Hare, right? You got a couple highways right here in Chicago that run right near there, and they got some nice high-rise. I'm sure that office space is pretty expensive. Well, I wouldn't want to be sitting in your nice window office and hearing the rumble of the jets going by real loud. Well, excellent. I think
Fortunately, sound is similar to air in terms of the way you stop it to a large extent.
I don't see any more questions, and I know we're a little bit over time. We ran over a little bit, and I certainly want to thank Aubrey Swift from DBHMS. Did a dynamite job putting this presentation together. It was certainly way deeper than even our normal tech talks with his slides here. So I want to certainly thank you, Aubrey, for your hard work, as well as put a plug in. anyone else that would like to take a shot at doing a tech talk, you can see it does take a lot of effort. This is all volunteer hours that go into this for all of us. So we open it up. Anyone that's got a good case story, good interesting project, you can see what Aubrey did, and would love to have some other presenters. So certainly you can reach out to the BCA Central Chapter board members. Would love to get some other folks to do some more presentations. We will be on same time, third Tuesday of every month, with every now and then an exception for things like NCBC. So it's 11:30 Central Time, 12:30 Eastern Time, third Tuesday of every month. With that, it's John Villani, and if you haven't done so, go to the BCA website. I will ask and plead one more time. Right on the bottom of the homepage, it's the C-Note campaign. We really need everyone to make your contribution. I've done it, so I'm not asking you to do anything that I wouldn't do myself. I've already done it. Each Central Chapter board member has done it. So we are looking to, and by the way, the Central Chapter is, I think by head count, the largest chapter in all of the BCA, which does mean we have the most people that can make that contribution. So we really need those funds to make this accreditation happen. Aubrey supported it in his comments, so I'll make that last plug for some people that might not have been there. But right on the BCA homepage, it's on the bottom right when you look at the screen. With that, I'm signing off, and I will see everyone a month from now. Thank you. Thank you, Aubrey.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the podium.
All right, take care.
Okay, bye-bye.